Optimism isn't sunshine and rainbows. It's fixing things, changing the way we fix things. It's running the world on smarter energy. Because if optimism never stops, then change can't either. GE Vernova, the energy of change.
So Donald Trump, since I know you're watching, I have 4 words for you. Turn the volume up.
Welcome to Quiet Riot, the politics podcast that's less gunpowder plot and more velvet revolution. I'm Andreou.
And I'm Kenny Campbell. Less gunpowder plot and more velvet underground, really. Every week, we try to inform rather than inflame.
So put on your favourite dressing gown, settle into your favourite comfy chair, cuddle that mug, and let us start another Quiet Riot. Hello, I'm Alex, Quiet Riot's resident Greek bearing gifts of political insight, I try, and occasional bemusement, more likely.
And I'm Kenny, Quiet Riot's resident Scot, and someone who is not too wary of Greeks bearing gifts, especially if those gifts are in the form of donations to our show, something you can also do at ko-fi.com/Quiet Riot Pod. Just a few of your hard-earned pounds can help us keep Quiet Riot free for all our listeners, whether they can afford to pay or not.
Now, on this week's show, exactly 1 year on from the US election, American voters get a chance to tell Trump what they think of his second term so far and what they said we would have to believe.
And we look at Rachel Reeves trying to prepare the country for a budget bombshell, while those at the extremes try to light the gunpowder strewn around her.
We're joined by Quiet Riot regular, former special advisor and current political consultant extraordinaire, Salma Shah. Welcome back, Salma.
Hello, nice to be back.
Salma, we were trying to arrange a coffee this week, and your first available slot was the 15th of December. Is that any way to live?
It is. And once we get the figures from the OBR at the Chancellor's budget, you'll see why people like me are desperately working.
It's meant to be a light-hearted start to the program, and you had to make it into a political point.
Politics on Quiet Riot. Who'd have thunk it?
But seriously, do you occasionally think that maybe you enjoy busyness a bit too much?
No, it's not that I enjoy busyness. It's that I am very regimented. And I think anybody who works in government is incredibly regimented, and it's very hard to break out of that cycle. And also I have 2 young children, and so anybody who's a parent will tell you that structure. I mean, my kids went and stayed with their grandparents for half term last weekend, and I honestly sat and I was like, I don't know what to do with myself for an hour, and was like, well, what do I do now? I had absolutely no structure. It all fell away and I was completely lost. So perhaps it's structure that is the thing that I like.
We've also got a second guest in the form of geopolitical megabrain and foreign policy expert Arthur Snell. Although I don't really know that Arthur still counts as a guest, because we've got a bit of a joint announcement, don't we, Arthur?
Well, indeed, yes. I'm like one of those guests that never leaves.
Our favourite sort, Arthur. What's happening with Behind the Lines?
Yeah, so Kenny, very exciting for me. Behind the Lines, which is a podcast I've now been running for a couple of years, where we interview real experts on all manner of international affairs issues. Behind the Lines is coming under the umbrella of Quiet Riot. So we are now joint production, I guess.
Sister podcasts, basically.
Something like that.
Listen, I know some of our listeners already are very, very big fans of Behind the Lines, but if anybody's listening and hasn't given it a listen yet, I can heartily recommend the latest episode with guest Emily Thornberry, who currently chairs the Foreign Affairs Committee. We'll pop a link in the show notes, of course. Arthur, putting together a professional, heavy-hitting podcast such as Behind the Lines, that ain't easy.
To be honest with you, it's not easy in the sense that you have to work quite hard, obviously, to stay abreast of the issues and to find the guests that are at a level to make it worth the listener's while. And I hope that all listeners will sort of leave an episode feeling better informed. But in some respects, it's just wonderful because it gives me the excuse to have a long conversation with a really interesting person about a topic that I find fascinating.
No wonder we ended up as siblings, because that's very much the Quiet Riot vibe. Although today we'll have to settle for you and Salma.
Oh, yeah. Oh, this is starting to sound like a proper family Christmas already, isn't
Yeah,
it?
exactly.
Yeah, or a Kent County Council reform meeting.
Quiet Riot.
Just over a year ago, most polling companies weren't even testing the name Zohran Mamdani in the New York mayoral race, yet he is now the city's youngest mayor, despite Trump's endorsement of Andrew Cuomo, failed Democratic nominee and fellow alleged sexual predator.
So hear me, President Trump, when I say this. To get to any of us, you will have to get through all of us. New York will remain a city of immigrants, a city built by immigrants, powered by immigrants, and as of tonight, led by an immigrant.
This was the headline of a night full of terrible results for the Republicans. Virginia and New Jersey, where Trump had made some progress last year, swung defiantly against him. And in California, an even bigger headache, Prop 50, the threat that if the GOP gerrymander Texas, California will respond in kind, was approved by a stinging 2-1 majority. If you can make it there, you'll make it anywhere, the song about the Big Apple goes. But will the Democrats agree with the sentiment or see Mamdani's success as a one-off? So let's kick this off with a question to all of you. Is there a message from this clutch of US results, or is there a danger that it's going to be overinterpreted by those of us desperately looking for some good news out of the States?
Yeah, well, I think there's definitely a message. There's this classic thing where if Republicans win, then those of us on the sort of left, centre left will say this is the end of, centre left politics and a permanent Republican majority is now in place. And then when Republicans lose, we say, well, it doesn't count because it's just New York or something. Or, we always find a way to talk ourselves down. I think there's a really important point here, which is, yes, Mamdani won in a very progressive city, a very urban environment of a sort that actually in North America is unusual. But it's not just him. People were winning in Virginia, in bits of Mississippi. So all across the country, in very, very different parts of America, Democrats standing on rather different platforms are beating Republicans. And that has got to be good news.
What do you think, Salma? It's not just the fact that New York is basically a different country, city within the United States, is it? It's something bigger than that.
Yeah, and what's interesting about it is that if you do as I do, which is read lots of English language newspapers across the world, I mean, everything from Australia going into Southeast Asia, the Middle East and beyond, they're all leading with the story that Zohran Mamdani has become New York's mayor. And the reason for that simply is that New York is the world's largest financial center. And even though culturally it is different from the rest of the United States, it is a really important city globally. Look, let's not over-egg it. The mayor doesn't have powers to change the financial systems, but the budgets and the policies that sit in the mayor's control may not serve Wall Street's interests in the same way as they might have done under someone else. So it has implications. The tone of what's happening in New York does have a knock-on effect of what happens in other capitals and other financial centers. So it is important, but we might not want to read too much into it just yet.
Alex, zooming out a little bit, the state-level data from places like Virginia and New Jersey is getting less attention. Are we seeing movement in comparison to last year's elections out there?
Yes, there is a danger of overinterpreting, for sure. Midterm elections tend to involve a swing against the incumbent almost always. But there are notable things going on. The first notable thing in all the four sort of different electoral events that took place this week is high turnout. All of them had really notably high turnout for their respective comparative framework, if that makes sense. So for the previous gubernatorial rates, the previous mayoral elections. I mean, Mamdani is the first mayoral candidate, even though Democratic candidates won it by bigger percentage majorities the last 2 or 3 times. He's the first Democratic candidate to get well over 1 million votes since the 60s. And by a lot, like the last few mayors that have been elected were around the 700-something vote mark. Andrew Cuomo, with the number of votes he got, would have won any New York mayoral election since the mid-90s. And yet against Mamdani, he was almost 10% short. And along with, I've been a big critic of how flaccid the Democratic Party has been in its responses to Trump in general. But I have to give them credit in that the current DNC has put a huge level of investment at state voter registrations for the last year. They really have tried very, very hard to get new voters registered, young people, people from minorities, and get them to turn out to vote. So there's an element of that is working, and we are seeing that in the data. The second really notable thing that I would take away from it is that there is now a giant gender gap opening up. In New Jersey, the difference between how men voted and how women voted was 26%. In Virginia, it was about 13%, smaller, but still very, very notable. And I think that is, again, a pattern that will be giving Republican strategists a little bit of a headache. The states themselves did move against Trump. His interpretation is that that's because he wasn't on the ticket and also because of the government shutdown, which I find quite striking, considering that this whole time they've been saying the shutdown is the fault of the Democrats. So yes, don't overinterpret it, but there do seem to me patterns forming that essentially they're an expression of if you keep taking power away from people, and Trump has made Democratic voters especially feel very disempowered and very threatened. So if you keep taking power away from people, the moment they have a little bit of power to punish you, they will take the opportunity to do it. I think that's the biggest takeaway.
Looking at the Republican situation in particular for a moment, Trump says that Republicans lost because he wasn't on the ticket. Well, of course he says that. And also, as you said, Alex, because of the government shutdown. So even if Trump is right to a certain extent in what he says about the reasons for getting stuffed last night, Salma, can I ask, how would that help Congress Republicans looking nervously ahead to the midterms and wondering how on earth they can defend the seats?
Look, I think there's a couple of things that we have to take these comments in the context of. One is, Trump is a New Yorker ultimately. And I think for somebody who has a lot of pride and really thinks of himself as like the ultimate winner, this is obviously going to burn. Mamdani made a point of going out and looking for disenfranchised working class people who had voted for Trump. I mean, it was really big early campaign. So he was going for Trump. He, even in his address after victory, he was referencing the fact that the president was watching him. So he's really sort of going for Trump, which clearly has created a reaction. And there is, particularly in the MAGA movement, a softening of support for Trump, especially with what's going on internationally. They don't feel that that is true to the MAGA movement. You only need to look at people like Marjorie Taylor Greene to know that there is that softening of support within. So I think that he's got to do what he always does, which is show this robust fighting attitude against someone like Mamdani. And it also plays to his strength to have a bad guy opponent that he can easily criticize and go after. So it speaks to his personality. It clearly has had an impact on him personally, but it is really about reverting back to the Trump type and finding that opponent and trying to galvanize the support behind him before the midterms.
Can I ask you, Salma, though, doesn't that also involve a risk? If he overdoes it, does it not begin to look like disrespect for the democratic choices people have made in these elections? And Americans, I think, have quite an emotional relationship with the way they see their democracy, even MAGA ones. Is there not a danger that it begins to look like, if I don't like the choice you make as a city or as a state, then I'm going to punish you just like a king would?
Yeah, absolutely. But this is somebody who talked about the election being stolen from him the last time. So, that theme of respecting the democratic will isn't necessarily true of the president. But I would also say that this is a natural structural occurrence of incumbency, because you can be the guy that nobody knew a year ago and be fresh-faced and have a brilliant campaign, which he did, even though I oppose a lot of what Mamdani is suggesting in terms of policy. You can have all that and be free of the burden of incumbency. And Trump doesn't have that anymore. And so this is the natural structural result of what happens when you've been in term and you try to play the popular guy being on the side of the people until the reality of government and choices hits you.
Arthur, can I ask you something? What is getting less coverage, I think? Because, it's such a binary environment. Basically, everyone picks a side and claims either victory or defeat. But wasn't the Mamdani victory as much a rebuke of the Democratic Party establishment as it was of Trump?
Well, I certainly think it's a rebuke of the kind of New York, probably slightly lazy Democratic establishment. And in a way, the point is that Andrew Cuomo, who comes from this great dynasty of New York politicians, clearly felt it was his birthright. And then interestingly, when he couldn't win the primary, quite a lot of big Democratic Party figures, including Hakeem Jeffries, arguably sort of the most senior on the national stage, wasn't quite ready to endorse Mamdani, even though Mamdani is the chosen candidate and has proven himself to be a brilliant campaigner. And so I think you're absolutely right. It looked a little bit like perhaps we saw in some cases in this country, in places where the Labour Party always expected to win elections. So I think there is some of that. But equally, what's interesting is, Mamdani runs as an insurgent and a socialist, whereas in Virginia, former CIA officer Abigail Spanberger runs as a kind of national security apparatchik and as a moderate, and they both won. So I think we probably have to be cautious about if there's a message that applies across the board, or whether it is very much depending on where you are in what is obviously a vast country.
I think that's fair. I think that's right. However, New York does present the Democratic Party, I think, with a dilemma. They now have to decide, I think, whether they want Mamdani to succeed or fail, because It is within their gift actually to help or hinder. And if Mamdani succeeds, they might have internal headaches in terms of the primary for the presidential. And if Mamdani fails, that gives them whole different kinds of headaches. And so they're in an interesting pickle, I think. They can't keep riding two horses on this. They have to either embrace him or not.
But I wonder whether Trump will actually make it easier for them, because Trump is so unhinged. I honestly don't think we can rule out that he'll try to deport Mamdani. He'll try to prove that he doesn't have the right to be an American and kick him out of the country. And I know I sound like a sort of slightly conspiracy guy at this point, but this is happening to other people who are American citizens. And to a brown-skinned Muslim who just won the vote in Trump's home city. When Trump sort of goes off on some unhinged extrajudicial targeting of the guy, of course it will make it easier for the Democrats to defend him on the basic principles of the Constitution rather than his politics.
Quiet Riot. Quiet Riot.
In terms of lessons that could be learnt from what's happened this week, even though, Salma, for example, we might disagree about some of the policies that Mamdani has put forward, one thing that we can agree on is that he's really managed to put together a pretty extraordinary coalition of older middle-class liberals, younger idealists, and working-class people who are struggling with the cost of living in a very real and horrible way over there. Do you think that moderates can genuinely learn from him, or are centrist policies really not that well suited to bombast?
Yeah, it's really hard to be compelling when your message as a centrist is, well, yes, that is true. But it's a little complicated and nuanced than that. It doesn't really make for great TikTok videos. They're not really very many viral moments with, your very typical sort of centrist right or even centrist left sort of person. I think actually there is, as well as the kind of questions around what happens with the Democrat Party and the wider sort of left firmament, on the cost of living issue, there is a really big question for the right as well. Not just Trump, but the global right, which is we can talk about the economy. We can talk about macro level growth, taxation, global competitiveness, et cetera, the new trends coming with AI, what that means, blah, blah, blah. But today, what is the right's answer on things like cost of living? And we'll have that in our budget. Trump will be facing the same issues. You have the same problems that you see in New York that Mamdani was talking about in terms of rent prices, in terms of food prices, in terms of transportation, in terms of crime. Those problems exist in all advanced economies in Western liberal democracies. It's true in Berlin, in Paris, in London. So there is a question for anyone who wants to achieve even local or national victory on the right, which is how are you addressing those concerns? The question is around inflation. The question will be around wage growth and stagnating wage growth, but nobody has a real clear answer about what the political sell is going to be around those questions. And I think Mamdani does offer some very compelling arguments, but you get into questions around rent control, for example, which has severe economic implications for investment, for example. So whilst it sounds good, it's not obvious that anybody has the answers alternative to what Mamdani is suggesting.
What I would counter is that I think Mamdani actually has quite a lot in common with Trump, and in a strange way with people like Farage or Polanski, in that they all acknowledge the decline and seek to offer to reverse it. Whether the solutions are real or snake oil, whatever you think of their policies, there is a difference in tone, I think, from centre-right, centre and centre-left parties, which on the whole say all we need to do is manage things, tweak it a little bit. And we saw that, for instance, very recently in the Netherlands, where the new Prime Minister-elect, Jette, a very, very center-left politician. But there was that flavor to his campaign that he came out and he said, I get it. I see that what is currently happening is really not working for most people, and we need to do something about it. And I think that is the dividing line. The dividing line is not the political solutions that you offer. The dividing line comes, I think, earlier from simply acknowledging that things are shit for you. And we need to do something about it, as opposed to, okay, things are not as great as they could be, but if we boost growth by 0.3%, there'll be marginally less rubbish.
But it's a question of levers. And this is why we need to wait to see actually how his term pans out. Because you can achieve office and then realize that actually some of the things that you've promised aren't doable. But I totally recognize what you are saying, which is actually trying to understand what is the lived experience of individuals and how they're actually dealing with the reality on the ground. And I also accept that there is space now, in a way that there hasn't been for the last 2 decades, for a radicalism. But it sort of depends on whether you believe in left or right radicalism.
Yeah, the Cincinnati mayoral election is not ordinarily one that would have many eyeballs on it. But Vice President J.D. Vance's half-brother, Cory Bowman, a Republican, lost his bid to win the mayoralty against Indian-American Aftab Pureval, who won the Cincinnati mayoralty with more than a whopping 80% of the vote. So maybe there's a message there as well.
In California, there was a very different approach on the table, wasn't there? And it's not one that probably appeals to moderate consensus building sensibilities, but it was the approach that, hey, 2 can play at that game. And I'm talking about Proposition 50. Arthur, do you think Prop 50 was really the only avenue left to Dems to try to restrain the open gerrymander that was starting to take place in places like Texas?
Yeah, and I think actually quite a lot of people in the kind of moderate centre feel that the approach taken by Gavin Newsom, which is basically to say, well, if you want to fight dirty, we will do that, but we'll do it in a way that shows that we still care about the rules. So the whole point about Prop 50 was that it's a time-limited plan, basically, yes, to gerrymander, to create more seats, but to do so in a way to counteract what is a nakedly partisan power grab by a Republican administration that has discarded all the norms of constitutional democracy. And I think in this context, but also perhaps in the Brexit fight here in the UK, there was often a sense from the moderates that actually our cause is every bit as just, probably way more just than that on the other side. And yet somehow we're not prepared really to fight to make it so. Gavin Newsom, I think why he's very effective, because he's found a way to combine centrist politics with a willingness actually to sort of take the fight to the other side. And I think sometimes people in the centre feel very powerless. They feel that somehow the rules no longer work for sort of the law-abiding politician, and that it's always, whether it's a kind of a Dominic Cummings approach or a Donald Trump approach, that there are people who rip up the rule book and romp home every time. And that's one of the things that has left a lot of mainstream people just completely turned off from politics.
I mean, Newsom himself never one to hold back. He said that Trump's been 1 click behind for the last few weeks. Let's have a listen to that.
And you can see this. You can read between the lines. The last few weeks, I just feel like he's 1 click behind He's nowhere to be found. There's no clicks. No one wants to be associated with him in Virginia, in New Jersey, certainly in California. I felt like he was away last week, and he didn't even really matter. It didn't matter. I don't want to overstate this. You saw him today trying to get in the game. Hey, what about me with Cuomo? What about me out here? And, saying he's going to investigate us for criminal activity in California. Something's happening.
I mean, Arthur, do you think that Trump genuinely is losing his grip on the media cycle?
There's always a tension in the Trump universe between the personal urges of an aging billionaire with some pretty toxic behavioral traits, and then a much more calculating campaign driven by people like Stephen Miller, which is effectively to sort of de-democratize the United States and turn it into a kind of corporate oligarchy run in the interests of those in charge. And clearly it's for white people. Trump is very distracted, and he's distracted, for example, by the Epstein stuff because he knows that he's exposed there. He's distracted probably by his own rapid aging, which would clearly distract anyone. And he's probably becoming a bit obsessed with things like remodeling the White House because that's something that he understands and he can deal with.
It's legacy, isn't it?
Having marble bathrooms and gold crap on the walls. That's his world.
Sorry, I actually really love that aesthetic. I'll not hear a word said against it.
I once personally likes it.
I once went to Salma's house, and the guest bathroom was stacked with boxes of confidential files.
Like the gold caps.
We all have our crosses to bear.
What do you think, Salma? Is his grip beginning to slip a little bit?
Look, it's very hard. I mean, obviously, he's president, okay? So everything will go up to him because that is the system. Its executive power resides in this one person. However, in all previous administrations, you would always have big figures. And Trump administrations don't tend to have big figures. They have only Trump. So it sort of makes it slightly difficult. It's a bit like the royal family, now that it's diminishing and getting smaller. How do you cover the footprint and how do you create presence all of the time? And it is the downside of having one supreme character that leads everything. When Trump decides that he wants to make news, he will go out and he will do it. But he can't do it all the time. And that's where the control seeds. This is a practical question around comms management and the way that you run what we would traditionally call a media grid effectively. But all of that is blown out of the water when you have such a person who calls all the shots and is the main guy, in fact, the only guy in government.
That's why I think Newsom's comments struck a chord with me, because the last month is the first time that I've seen Trump consistently turn to other people behind him in his team and say, I don't know, is that in the deal? Did we just sign that? He's doing that quite a lot. And it's something that Trump 45 never did. He found a way to answer either in a general way or to deflect, or he never deferred to other people for an answer that he didn't have. And that's been happening a lot recently. So I don't know what's going on. It's a much busier presidency. God knows there's a lot more stuff going on. And maybe Trump himself, with the whole tariffs thing, bit off a bit more than he could chew and then couldn't fully manage the fallout of that. There's something going on. There is a marked difference, I think. The repercussions of Trump's perceived authority slipping are, of course, not limited to the US, but of huge significance in global affairs. Arthur, my sense is that there has been more rhetorical rather than practical movement on progress in Ukraine. Why do you think there is a lag?
From the start with Ukraine, what Trump wanted to do was to force the Ukrainians to accept a pro-Russian peace deal. And periodically, when the Russians show that they're not interested, when Putin shows he's not interested because he still believes, I think wrongly, but he still believes that he can win a total military victory, then Trump gets very cross with the Russians, cross with Putin, because it's embarrassing for him. So then you get these little moments where Trump will do something that is against Russia. We've just had the tightening of sanctions on Russia's oil sector, for example. We had the sort of prick teasing that Trump might give Tomahawk cruise missiles to Ukrainians, which he's now wound back from. But what you've got fundamentally, I think Trump has moved from a outright hostility to Ukraine to a kind of grumpy neutrality. As long as someone else is paying, he's happy for the US weapons to keep going to the Ukrainians. As long as someone else is organizing it, he's happy for these sanctions to unfold. But he would still obviously prefer it if he could claim the credit for a big peace deal that gave Russia what it wanted, and then he could say, I ended the war in Ukraine, which of course he claimed he would do in a day.
What about Gaza? It has kind of fallen out of the news reporting recently. I mean, I find it really bizarre. Not mentioned in the hourly cycle. I see sporadic reports of Israel resuming aspects of its military campaign, and I don't have a clear view whether those are exceptions to a ceasefire, whether those are just to do with Hamas, or whether they are signs that the ceasefire is more imagined than real and is in the process of collapsing.
I think with Gaza, there's something slightly more interesting going on, which is that obviously Trump never has a plan. So he got the hostages out, and credit to him for doing that. And of course, it's been noted that he probably could have done that earlier and saved more lives. But whatever. It happened when it happened. He has no real plan for the day afterwards for the long-term settlement. But I think where it gets interesting is that both sides, both Israel and the Palestinians and their closest allies, and of course we're talking about the various Arab states and notably Qatar and its relationship with Hamas, they're all actually quite scared of Trump. And this is where it pains me to say it, but you have to sort of credit his kind of mad approach. No one wants to be clearly against the Trump peace plan. But because the peace plan isn't spelled out, what you're getting is these, as you rightly said, sort of sporadic, the Israelis will go in, and it's, it's awful. They killed 100 people in Gaza the other day. In any normal situation, this would be a major story on the world stage. And of course, sadly, it isn't at the moment. But it's a massive diminution of what's happened before, because no one wants to have Trump suddenly focus on it for 10 minutes and then give a speech or do a truth social and say, I'm very cross with Bibi because he's broken the ceasefire. So I think there's this weird thing where people are just a bit frozen. But as I say, because there isn't an actual plan, there isn't anything really playing out that leads to a long-term settlement.
Well, we have more nuclear weapons than any other country. I think we should do something about denuclearization. Russia has a lot of nuclear weapons, and China will have a lot. They have some, they have quite a bit. But
so why do we need to test our nuclear weapons?
Well, because you have to see how they work. You do have to. And the reason I'm saying testing is because Russia announced that they were going to be doing a test. If you notice, North Korea is testing constantly. Other countries are testing. We're the only country that doesn't test. I don't want to be the only country that doesn't test.
I just want a martini now. So.
That sounds good. I'd love a martini.
Do you think that was a Trump brain fart? Or is this something that should be keeping us awake a little bit at night?
It's very interesting. The way he framed it, he said it's not fair because he thinks that Russia and China get to fire nukes and he doesn't. And obviously, because he's got the brain of an 8-year-old, and it wouldn't be fair if you were 8 and your friends all had nukes and you didn't. You'd feel left out. But
now that you say it, of course that's what it is, right? They get to play with their nukes and he doesn't get his.
Yeah, and I imagine that some boring general has had to go in and sort of quietly tell him that his nukes are bigger and better and he doesn't need to worry, and that's probably calmed him down a little.
Arthur, have you got a call to action for us this week?
Yeah. One area we haven't talked about, but lots of listeners will be well aware that actually there's been horrific bloodshed in Sudan, notably in the town of El Fasher, which was the last town on the western side of Sudan, last major town that was still held by the Sudanese army against this rebel militia, the RSF. The siege collapsed, and it's still not clear just how many people have died there, but we're talking horrific numbers, tens of thousands. There are lots of organizations that are working in Sudan, but I want to particularly underline the work of a long-standing, very well-reputed charity called Relief International. It sounds like a description, but it is the name of the charity, ri.org. Tragically, in April, a large number of their staff were killed in Sudan by the RSF. Completely outrageous attack on a refugee camp, but they're still operating there in spite of that, and I think they deserve our support.
Quiet Riot. This podcast is brought to you by Carvana. Carvana lets you buy your next car on your terms. Explore a massive inventory online, filter for what matters, and find your perfect match. Then choose delivery to your home or pick it up at one of Carvana's iconic car vending machines. Every car also comes with a 7-day money-back guarantee, so you can make sure it's the right fit. Buy your car on Carvana. Delivery or pickup fees may apply. Limitations and exclusions may apply. See our 7-day return policy at Carvana.com.
Carvana.
Quiet Riot.
Okay, what's been melting the right-wing snowflakes of our world this week? There's only one way to find out. It's time for Wokey Dokey.
Okie dokie.
Alex, what's ignited the righteous blowtorch of political correctness among the most delicate of commentators this week?
Kent County Council was described by Reform as its shop window. It was going to show apparently how the party would be in government. Since then, a leaked video of the leader shouting obscenities at council members, a total of 5 suspensions, a defection to another party, a criminal investigation even going on at the moment, and the complete failure of the Doge department to find any savings, and pretty consistent briefings that the council is about to put up its council tax. The latest bombshell is the funniest of all. You know that meme of the superhero sweating which button to press?
Yes.
GB News title, I'm reading here, Reform-run council blocks village from putting up Christmas lights unless St. George's flag's removed. So Kent County Council, whose leader vowed not to remove flags, Lyndon Kemkeran, she said, the Union Jack, the flag of St. George and the flag of Kent, they are the identity that we all share. So they've now issued a command to a local parish council, Harrietsham, to remove flags because apparently it's a safety risk to put up the Christmas lights while the flags are still on the lamppost. Now, Harrietsham says that basically they can't do it because the poles, the lights, don't belong to them. They have absolutely no authority to go up and remove or add anything, and that the contractor is refusing to do it because it's not in the original quote, and that unless someone comes and removes these flags, they will be stuck still with paying for the Christmas lights rental, but they won't be able to put them up. The net result is that it's now too late, it looks like. The Christmas lights won't go up because no one is taking ownership of these flags that were put up by private individuals in the middle of the night. And so this week, Reform UK are woke, I'm afraid. Not just woke, they're doubly woke. They are both ordering the removal of the St. George's flags that are proudly flying, but they have also inadvertently cancelled Christmas.
That's real power.
So, yeah, Kent County Council, Reform-run Kent County Council, our wokey-dokey of the week.
Thank you so much, Alex. And thank you also to the world of mad anti-woke people out there for keeping us supplied with nuggets like that. Listeners, if you stumble across any more of this stuff, please do email it to us at quietriotpod@gmail.com.
Quiet Riot.
Rachel Reeves is pulling off this plaster as slowly and painfully as possible. That's what one Labour MP said after a speech in which the Chancellor hinted at tax rises but refused to confirm them. Let's have a little listen.
The continual threat of tariffs has dragged on global confidence, deterring business investment and dampening growth. Inflation has been too slow to come down as supply chains continue to be volatile, and the cost of government borrowing has increased around the world, a shift that Britain, with our high levels of debt left by the previous government, has been particularly exposed to. And in an uncertain world, we also face pressure to increase our defence spending, and it is right that we do that.
Now, Reeves's diagnosis is spot on, in my view. The economic impact of Brexit, the chronic neglect of public services, the effect of tariffs, the strikingly different defence spending environment we're seeing, the global economic slowdown, they all require a change of stance. But maybe the last budget was the time to bring all those things up when they would have been, I think, more credible. And all of this against the background of division and suspicion threatening to boil over and actively fed by actors, both foreign and domestic. I predict there will be an election in 2027, beamed Farage in a substance-free speech to the city, while his fellow travellers were just asking questions, trying to capitalize on a violent attack. Modern gunpowder plots, it seems to me, rely on the explosive power of social media. Salma, Labour looks set to break their manifesto commitment and raise taxes. Is it a commitment they should never have made?
Well, look, it's difficult not to have made the commitment because they were pincered as you often are in a political campaign. It was, I've often said, the original sin of the Labour manifesto was to box themselves in. But as you rightly say, the moment to sort of be strategic and think ahead and to rip the plaster off rather than peel it off slowly, as you put it, was the last budget. And there was just too much optimism, really, about where the economy was going to go. That was sort of the problem, because there is just not enough thinking ahead and trying to take the tough decisions early to give yourself that run road. And I don't know if that is a lack of institutional knowledge. I don't know if that's tactical ignorance. I don't know why the Chancellor made the choices that she did at the last budget, because the subsequent fallout of nearly every decision that she has made has been detrimental to the wider credibility of the government.
A lot of Labour voters, I think, will be turned off by the breaking of a promise. But a lot of them, maybe even more of them, have been turned off by the lack of a sort of more dynamic government offering solutions. So is Reeves hoping that the latter is a bigger factor than the former? What I mean by that is that the breaking of a promise that shows a more radical approach will be forgiven.
I'm not sure about that with this ridiculous pre-budget speech that was given, which I found completely misguided in terms of the way that she needed to land this message.
Yeah.
Radicalism doesn't sit necessarily with the finances. It sits with how are you going to use those budgets and that delivery within those departments to show that the income tax increase, if that's what it's going to be, is going to be worth it in the long term. So there seems to be a disconnect between number 10, the Treasury, which essentially does the strategy and the money piece of it, and the strategy that sits within these departments that is about the delivery piece and the push for change that they need to see, that they really needed to start seeing by next year if they had a hope of trying to win the next election, because they staked everything on delivery. And I'll give you a clearer example of this. It's things like the digital ID card system that they've announced. Now, I'm actually quite pro it. I think that there are lots of benefits that you could have with digital ID for convenience of individuals, but also in terms of systems of government. But they announce these things and it's not really attached to anything. It's not really attached to a delivery. It's not really attached to something that's costed. It's not really got a projection of how much money we think it's going to save. So all these policies are just sort of orphaned out there. And I'm worried that she's going to make this huge announcement, break this pledge in the manifesto that she was absolutely, committed to, even though everybody said you should not box yourself in. And it'll just be a nothingness after all this drama.
To switch to the other side of the aisle, this week also marks a year from Badenoch taking over the Tory leadership, which means MPs can now put letters to the 1922 committee. What is your assessment of her first year?
Look, it's been an undeniably mixed picture.
If it's undeniably, it ain't that mixed, babe.
Undeniably mixed. Look, I remember doing a clip for you at the leadership announcement, and I was really thrilled that Kemi Badenoch was the leader for lots of reasons. I felt that she could occupy the space that has been left behind, which is limited for a Conservative Party, which might be the official opposition, but is not what everyone's talking about. They're fighting between Reform and Labour to be heard. There are, just as I've criticised the Chancellor for strategic missteps, there are strategic missteps in the Conservative leadership, exacerbated by the fact that the weakness that seems apparent in the leadership is being completely exploited by the likes of Robert Jenrick and any backbencher who's looking for a slight bit of profile. The critical thing for her, I think, is that she seems to be finding her feet. Maybe a little bit too late. There is a lot of criticism behind the scenes about her, but she is starting to carve out a niche for herself, particularly around business and economics. And I think she does need to keep pushing that. And she perhaps does need to take lessons around social media and viral campaigns and step out of her comfort zone, because she talks a good game, but really from behind closed doors, because you can try and do the kind of like hardline Mrs. Thatcher piece. But until you actually get out there and try and understand what are people's concerns and look genuinely interested in what people are saying to you and adapt your messaging and adapt your policies to speak to that, like Mr. Mamdani, you're never going to break free of this awkwardness that she seems to inhabit, and that is really a problem for her presentationally, and it will stymie her ability to be able to make those arguments in the future if she does want to go down a more radical route around the state, if she does want to go down a more radical route around the economy.
I have to say, I think you're being quite kind. I just think she's quite a bit shallower than all of you thought. You could get the same statement that she will make on any issue from a random right-wing Twitter account. That's my sense, that she doesn't have the depth and intelligence that she was credited with when she first arrived on the scene. And also, I think she disagrees too much. I know that's a strange thing to say about an opposition leader, but I think she needs to find some kind of policy stuff or international issues or security things on which she can agree and support the government.
Yeah.
Because otherwise it just looks like she's saying boo to everything, and it sort of becomes boring.
I thought it was a really interesting tactical misstep not to support the government in the first round when they were suggesting welfare cuts that then didn't pass and then created the issue in the markets. And I actually think that she would have raised her own credibility and been true to her own conservative beliefs if she had
been able to hit them over the head for the next 4 years with it only passed because of my votes.
So, yeah, there is a shallowness to that. I think the only thing that I would say is, having started my work as a bag-carrying apparatchik back in 2007, when the Tories were last in opposition, there was an understanding that David Cameron and George Osborne, who were incredibly young to be taking up the positions that they did, and I think they would admit in their most honest moments, incredibly inexperienced about the world generally, if not so much about politics, they realized what their weaknesses were and they tried to remedy for them. So George Osborne understood what his weaknesses were going to be as a shadow chancellor, and he was up against Gordon Brown at the time. And he tried to remedy his weakness by putting the right people around him. And I think that there is something that she can do to start thinking about how does she remedy the weakness, either in terms of her own development or trying to bring in people that will rally to the cause. And I think more and more people are starting to do that with her economic message. The thing that she lacks is time. And so speed is of the essence here. And, that might be the thing that undermines her in the end.
Quiet Riot.
Hey there, it's Dr. Sanjay Gupta with some exciting news to share. CNN is now streaming. That means you can read, watch, and stream everything in one subscription. You can watch news live 24/7. You can also explore catch-up videos and explainer videos, and you can also watch a library of CNN's originals, including my latest documentary, It Doesn't Have to Hurt. Just go to cnn.com/all-access.
Quiet Riot.
The sense that there's a bit of a shambles going on that side of the house was exemplified this week at PMQs, really, when James Cartledge, who was standing in for Badenoch, tried to embarrass David Lammy with a question and then reveal the answer. But he didn't count his questions, right? And he had to deliver the punchline in a point of order, kind of like a comedian setting up his final joke of the night and then having to tell the end in the foyer as everybody else is having their gin and tonics afterwards.
I've got to say to the honourable gentleman, he should do better.
Jonathan Blass. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituent, Georgia Hart.
What, I got it to 6. James Cartledge. Order. It is 6. I'm all right. 6, you've had your 6. Sorry, I was correct. Jonathan Blass. Point of order, is it to correct the number of questions that I was right and you were wrong?
It's on a serious issue, I think, Mr. Speaker, just to be clear. The Telegraph are reporting that a police manhunt has been launched for a second asylum seeker mistakenly freed from prison. The question is, Mr. Speaker, how can you advise me on how I can ask the Justice Secretary whether he was aware of this when I asked him about it repeatedly in Prime Minister's question?
You put it on the record, right? Let's just move on.
It's not a good look, is it?
No, but that does show the sort of inexperience that is on those benches at the moment. But I mean, that is also true of many Labour backbenchers. It is true of a lot of Lib Dems. It is certainly true of Reform. I think actually the bigger point here is that you do have quite an inexperienced House of Commons.
Yeah.
Yes, that's true. Yeah.
And that is bad for scrutiny. It's bad for legislation. It is bad for debate. You know, as everyone should, always be constantly thinking about how to elevate your game.
On the actual subject of that set of questions, I mean, mistaken releases, they happen. They happen under every government and will continue to. I don't think any Secretary of State would have given that hostage to fortune assurance that no one else is going to be mistakenly released. But is it right for the Tories to lean into the current moral panic about asylum seekers? And I don't just mean in the national interest sense, because I consider it quite unethical for them to stoke that fire right now. But even politically, like, isn't Farage the only winner? Because what Labour is going to say is you left us a prison system and an asylum system on the brink of collapse. So both will end up looking rubbish. So what's the strategy there?
You can't separate human nature from the way that one delivers strategy or questions or whatever. There is always going to be that element of emotion and human error that is part of that. Nobody can carry out a strategy perfectly and brilliantly. My view is that you're right. You cannot out Farage on immigration. And so you are better trying to stick to a safer spot that actually has resonant questions like the state of the economy, what is happening in housing, what are we actually scrutinizing that we can get some traction on that really has some real world impact. You know, really talk about the uniqueness and the differentiator of where the Conservatives want to go. And it is still about tonal direction. So there is that question of accepting our failures in government, being contrite about that, but moving forward and doing the job of scrutiny and highlighting the things that you want to highlight, which are really about the economy. Because neither of the two main parties, as you rightly say, are going to win on the immigration debate, but they can sort of think about the salience of that and where it is relevant and where it is not relevant. And that's why, you know, things like Robert Jenrick not being able to see a white face and talking about integration in the way that he did is manifestly unhelpful, not only to the Conservative Party, but also to him if he is trying to reach that stage of leadership. Because how is he going to out Farage? It just makes no sense.
After the knife attack on a train last weekend, we saw yet another spate of now very familiar dangerous posts online. Is it now a matter of when rather than if the situation boils over? Arthur, what do you think? Can government do anything about it? It seems such a hot situation, sawdust everywhere, and people keep throwing matches at it.
Yeah, and I think, you know, there is a particular and specific problem in the personality of Elon Musk, who clearly has got obsessed with the idea that Britain is on the verge of civil war and you know, his weird thing about going on about The Hobbit the other day and all that. On one level, it's easy to kind of laugh because you just think, who the hell is this guy? He knows nothing about Britain. But on the other level, you know, he has so much control and power over the narrative. It is difficult to know because I see all that. On the other hand, of course, you know, if there's a stabbing on a train, people will feel rightly angry and wound up. But we're not America. We don't have lots of people carrying guns. We don't actually have an issue of sort of vigilante violence. Of course, it will happen anywhere, but it's not become a feature of our society in the way that you see it in America in particular. So it's hard to know. I think there are people...
It has if you spend your time online. I think that's the point. There was a just utterly heartbreaking call to the James O'Brien LBC show this week, a woman who believes basically that her husband has been radicalized. Let's have a little listen.
When this incident happened, I got caught. Oh, you never guess what's happened now from downstairs. And I was like, what? Oh, yeah, they've done it again. Yeah, they've attacked all, people on the train. And I said, how do you know? Well, of course it is.
Did he want it to be? Did he?
Yeah, of course he did. Absolutely. Right. The grin on his face, it was like, told you so.
Okay, when did it start?
I think when Nigel Farage started, all this campaigning and turning up locally, because we live in Ramsgate, so that's quite close to, Dover and all that. And he's like, have you seen this? Have you seen this? Oh, this is it. They're all here. Oh, I went up to the shops the other day, couldn't see a white face. And they're all hanging about on street corners. Who are? Who are? And I'd say we had the biggest row all weekend. He thinks I'm just pathetic and I'm woke and I'm this, that and the other, and I won't be happy till we're taken over.
Does he? Where does he get his? Is he online a lot?
Yeah, oh God, all the time.
So the question is, Arthur, this deliberate inflaming of stories that could lead to disorder, is it a sign of conventions breaking down, or is it, I don't know, it seems strategic and deliberate. It might not be. I might be reading patterns in a sort of murmuration of starlings that is not consciously doing it. But it does feel like that gap, that information gap between an attack happening and proper information coming out, is the golden hour to sow discord, because they know that after information comes out, it might suit them, but it might not. So it's like, this is the time to seed the idea that Britain is lawless and marauded by immigrants.
And I think that that's definitely happening. There's absolutely no doubt about that. And I think what we've obviously got is we've got politicians, reform and elements of the Tories who are completely comfortable pushing this narrative. And then obviously you've got this parallel movement that, basically the sort of Tommy Robinson, British First, that kind of thing, which is operating along the same ideological track, but outside conventional political structures. And in that sense, it's not unlike when you see other radical movements where you might have violent Islamists and then you'll have people who will talk the politics whilst avoiding the actual call to violence. So I think it's a very dangerous time, definitely. And on the question of, is it organized? Is this random or not? It's very hard to know, isn't it? Certainly, there's lots of evidence that this so-called outpouring of patriotism, which led to flags being hung everywhere, that a lot of that did have an element of central organization and funding. You had people who were interviewed by the media who put up flags, claimed to be local activists, and then said, oh yeah, but Tommy Robinson's paying. But who's paying Tommy? So I think there are definitely things we don't know enough about. And of course, you've then got the fact that we are in a hybrid war with Russia, and Russia is quite good at these sorts of activities, which is to say, they're good at throwing money at random groups of people, some of whom may prove to be effective, others may prove to be completely useless.
Question to both you, Arthur and Salma. You're both familiar with the Prevent programme, but from different angles. With that in mind, what's the best way of approaching loved ones who might be on this very, very, very dangerous and unfortunate trajectory?
Look, I think that's such a difficult question because I've gone through the Prevent training, how do you spot someone and how do you refer them? Because I was a local governor and actually it was the first time I properly interacted with the programme on the ground. So I think there are a number of things that you can do, which is the official advice about how you talk to people, how you might want to refer them, how the professional services then interact with individuals that may have been radicalised. But the reality is that there is a bit of a disconnect between the way that we think Prevent is working and the way that it does work in some instances. And there have been two recent reviews, one under the Conservatives under Sir William Shawcross and one in July, which was a review around the ways two particular high-profile killers were radicalised and were on the Prevent programme. I don't have really a concrete answer or a helpful answer to say how you would talk to a loved one. But from a public policy perspective, I think it's really important that we try and narrow down that disconnect between policy and delivery of the programme, and that we really do try and understand very particularly what is that data piece and what is that telling us, and how does that help us then work out how we're talking to people, particularly those who've been radicalised online, where a conversation may not be necessarily possible because by the time they've actually become radicalised, you haven't noticed or picked up the signs. So the best thing that I can say is that we need to be more open and talk a lot more about what are the signs of somebody falling into that pit so we can capture them before it's too late.
Arthur, what's your view? I mean, I'm guessing you'll agree a lot with what Salma said there, but you've got your own particular perspective on the Prevent programme. What's your view on this?
Yeah, I mean, I strongly agree with what Salma said. I think something I'd add is simply having worked on the overseas elements of this, including, in places like Iraq and Afghanistan, something that you see is that we always over-fixate on ideology. So we go down this sort of tunnel of thinking, oh gosh, in this case, what kind of Islam are these people getting into? And is this a problem or is that a problem? And the issue, I think, is almost always psychology, not ideology. And I'm not saying we should all become amateur psychologists, because that would be a disaster. But fundamentally, this is about individuals feeling sort of profound lack of status, feeling that their needs aren't being met by the ordinary societal structures, and then they find it in some other place. Whether it's a radical right online group or whether it's a very twisted interpretation of a religion or something. And so I think what you see consistently is there'll be someone who's a charismatic individual who finds a way to recruit people. And sometimes that's a direct, you're in a group of guys and you meet this person and you look up to them. Or sad to say, for a lot of people, Tommy Robinson is a charismatic individual and he's recruiting. So that's common to many different ideologies. But the fundamental belief framework, I think, is pretty unimportant. And I think what's important is the vulnerability that the individual has to being drawn into that kind of radicalized ideological world.
Well, thank you both for that insight. Salma, with that in mind, have you got a call to action for our listeners?
Well, as a conservative that doesn't believe in other people telling you what to do, I don't have a specific call to action, but I would like to, as Arthur is now becoming your sibling, to endorse Arthur's call to action around Sudan. And I would urge people to remember that there's a whole big world out there. So do educate yourself about what's happening in the world, because it's closer than you think.
Fabulous.
The only thing I would add to that is go now and look for Arthur's podcast, Behind the Lines. I should say our podcast now, Behind the Lines, and do subscribe. We will not rest until you are as well informed about things around the globe as you are here at home.
Quiet Riot.
And that's all we have time for today. A huge thank you to Salma and to Arthur for being such brilliant, brilliant company. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Last one to Salma's gold bathroom. Has to pay for the martinis.
I'm a little bit Arab. I like that aesthetic. Sorry.
Someone I worked with in Iraq had sent me a photo of one of the bathrooms in the Saddam palaces that he'd taken back in the day. And it was obviously alongside the Trump one. And it was very, same energy.
Well, on that high note, please don't forget to join us at the weekend for Sunday School. There's a rumour that Naomi might be putting an appearance in at long last. Praise be! And if you're feeling generous, why not hit ko-fi.com/Quiet Riot Pod and back us for as little as $5 a month, which is cheaper than a London pint and a whole lot cooler as well.
Arthur, welcome again to the family. And to all of you out there, keep fighting the good fight and keep rioting, but quietly. We love you lots. Bye.
Bye.
Quiet Riot is an audio production by Cooler Heads with Naomi Smith and Alex Andreou. Produced by Kenny Campbell. Music by Mariana Sangeeta. Artwork by Simona Canelu. And edited by me, Alex Rees.
Quiet Riot.
For generations, Miami has been a haven for those fleeing communist tyranny in South Africa.